I don't usually give a title to sermons, but I think if I did, this one might be, Are You Following? First of all, it's a good check-in. I could just stop at any point in the sermon and ask, Are you following? But it's also the framework that we're going to use to process and to think about the gospel lesson for today. Are you following? First of all, I'd like to just get us thinking about a few everyday examples, because we follow lots of things in our lives. What are some of the things we follow? News stories, sports teams, directions or rules, our schedules, the weather. There's probably a lot more that we could add, but let's start there with a list of what and who we follow. And now for the next step. There's a variation of follow the leader that we would play at camp. I'm sure it's played in other settings as well, but we would play this game at camp where instead of walking around and following the leader, you sat in a circle, and then one person would leave that circle, and while they were gone, you would pick a leader, and that leader would start some sort of a pattern. If they were clapping or snapping or patting their head or whatever, they'd start something, and everybody would follow the leader. And once everybody was doing something, the person who had gone away from the circle would come back, and they'd stand in the middle of the circle, and as they were, looking around, the leader would change things up. They'd go from clapping to snapping or vice versa, whatever. And that person in the middle of the circle then would have, depending on how many people were playing, 2 or 3 guesses to figure out who the leader was. So you try to be kind of sneaky about it, right? And everybody would switch as fast as they possibly could, to confuse the person. But they'd have 2 or 3 guesses to figure out who the leader was. So next step, we have our list of what or who we follow. Like the game, how would someone who doesn't know who or what we're following know who or what we're following? So, yeah, let's go back to our list. How would they know you're following a news story? You might talk about it, or parts of that story might come up in conversation. With a sports team, it might be something you wear, or again, just talking about it. Did you see the game yesterday, right? With our schedules, you might know if you're following your schedule if you are at the places that are on your schedule, if you show up at those places, or do the tasks that are part of that schedule or routine. So yeah, just a few of those examples, and thinking about how would somebody who doesn't know you're following that know you're following that. Okay, so we've got our framework. Are you following, and how would someone know? Now there's a third question here, possibly, which would be, why are you following that, or what's the result of following that? But I think that's a sermon for another day. We'll focus in on these 2 parts for today. In the gospel lesson, we encounter John and 2 of John's disciples. When John points out Jesus to them and the significance of Jesus, he makes sure that they know. The disciples, they quite literally break away and follow him. And they keep following him until Jesus turns around and asks them, what are you looking for? But when Jesus does see them and ask them that, they reply with, Teacher, where are you staying? And he invites them to come and see and decide for themselves, And so they go and they stay and they keep following. there is something there worth knowing and being a part of that they see or hear or experience that day. And they keep following. What does it mean to follow Jesus? To keep following Jesus? Maybe next week's title will be, Are You Still Following? Now, in the disciples' case, it would be really easy to know who they're following. I mean, they're literally walking around with him. And they're going to end up doing a lot of the things that he does and continue on with his work and teaching and bringing to realization Jesus' lessons too. It's going to take persistence and courage for them to do that, to follow and keep following. But it's pretty clear that they are following Jesus. How would people know if we are following Jesus today? How would someone be able to tell? What would that look like from the outside? If you came into the circle of follow the leader, what would give it away that you're following Jesus? What should it look like for us to follow Jesus too? Maybe how we live, maybe that golden rule, right? How we treat others as you would do unto others as you would have them do to you. Being giving and nurturing, practicing empathy, showing up, very similar to showing up, attending church, charity activities or events or giving. Mm-hmm. It might be something that you wear. And it might be something that you talk about, very similar to our list from before, really. Personal practices, of course, too. Prayer, reading the Bible, going to Bible studies, church activities, in addition to worship services. Yep. Yeah, all of those things. Now, here's the thing. About this follow the leader piece. This isn't that game, right? In the game we talked about earlier, that follow the leader game, you try to trick the person who's guessing who you're following into, that there's a reason there's 3 guesses, right? But this isn't that game. Like the disciples, we don't need to try to be sneaky about it. For them, it's pretty obvious they're following Jesus. Hopefully for us too, it should be pretty obvious that we're following Jesus. We can do all of these things, and we can follow our leader and keep following. Amen.